There's a secret buried deep within the heart of almost every man you've ever met, a truth so delicate and so vulnerable that most would rather endure a lifetime of silent distance than speak it out loud. It has nothing to do with admiration for their strength, nor is it tied to recognition for their success or even to the desire to be wanted. It is something far more profound, something that reaches into the very fabric of their being, silently begging to be seen, yet carefully hidden behind masks crafted through years of emotional conditioning. Have you ever wondered why a man, even when deeply loved, admired, or physically desired, can sometimes appear unreachable, emotionally distant, or quietly restless? Have you questioned why, despite your gestures, affection, and presence, it can feel as if some part of him remains untouched, protected, guarded? The answer lies not in what you give him, but in what he is unable, or perhaps too afraid, to ask for. From the earliest stages of life, most boys are handed an invisible armor, stitched together by society's expectations. Don't cry, don't doubt, be strong at all costs. Vulnerability becomes a luxury they believe they cannot afford, and emotional needs are labeled as weaknesses they must conquer rather than understand. Carl Jung, in The Development of Personality, insightfully reflected on this struggle when he wrote, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. Most men have indeed passed through their personal infernos, but silently, alone, building walls that even they can no longer see through. Behind the composed, logical, and sometimes aloof facade, however, exists an unspoken yearning, the desire to be recognized not for the roles they play, not for the victories they accumulate, but for the essence of who they are when everything else is stripped away. It is not admiration for their achievements they crave. It is the rare, precious experience of being valued simply for existing. This hidden need is not something that beauty, sweetness, or romantic gestures alone can fulfill. It is something far more elusive. It is about how a man feels within himself when he is around you. Does he feel capable, trusted, respected, seen? Does he feel enough without having to constantly prove himself? Today we will journey into this often unspoken reality. We will uncover the emotional truth most men have been taught to suppress, explore why surface-level affection fails to reach the soul, and reveal how your authenticity, your words, and your emotional presence can unlock a depth of connection that most people only dream of experiencing. By the end of this exploration, you will not only understand how to capture a man's heart, but you will hold the key to touching the part of him that even he may have forgotten was still alive. Although many men wear confidence like a second skin and navigate life through the lens of logic and self-reliance, beneath that surface often lies a different story. One few have the words or even the emotional permission to share. Their upbringing did not just discourage vulnerability, it actively taught them that needing emotional connection was a sign of inferiority, a threat to the masculinity they were expected to embody. From early childhood, the lessons are clear and relentless. A boy falls, scrapes his knee, and is met, not with tenderness but with the stoic directive, be a man. He faces doubts or fears and is told to suppress them with silence or aggression. Every emotional wound not addressed becomes another layer of armor, and over time, most men come to believe that to be loved is to be needed for what they can offer: protection, provision, performance, but never simply for existing. Carl Jung, in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, captures the tragedy of this transformation when he writes, "Every transformation demands as its precondition the ending of a world, the collapse of an old philosophy of life." For many men, the old world they must leave behind is the one that taught them to devalue their own emotional selves. What men deeply long for, though they almost never confess it even to themselves, is a form of recognition that transcends admiration for their achievements or capabilities. They crave the quiet, almost sacred experience of being seen for the courage it takes to simply be, without constant striving, without proving their worth through external markers. They desire a love that does not negotiate their value based on success, dominance, or emotional invulnerability, but rather honors the raw human spirit that breathes beneath all of that. Imagine a man who works tirelessly, who carries the weight of providing, solving, fixing. On the outside, he might seem proud, even fulfilled, but inside there often lingers a fragile question he would never dare voice. If I couldn't offer all of this, would I still be enough for you? This question burns quietly behind his achievements, a silent echo within his victories, whispering fears of conditional acceptance. And yet, so few women ever reach this hidden place within him, not because they don't love him, but because they are taught too that men's value lies in what they can offer, not in who they are. Compliments focus on his career, his strength, his ability to be there, but rarely touch the soul beneath the armor. Relationships become transactions of performance rather than sanctuaries of acceptance. True connection, for a man, does not blossom through grand gestures or constant admiration of his power. It grows in the quiet, patient spaces where he feels that his existence, stripped of all titles and triumphs, still holds unquestionable worth. It is in those moments, when he realizes that he is seen, respected, trusted simply for being, that the deepest emotional bond takes root. Consider how transformative it is for a man to hear, not "you're amazing because you earn so much" or "you're so strong for holding it together," but something like "I admire how you stay grounded even when things get tough," or "I trust your way of seeing the world." These words do not inflate his ego, they validate his being. They are not rewards for performance, they are affirmations of identity. Carl Jung, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, highlights the importance of this internal recognition when he says, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." Men are often surrounded by people, by admiration, by expectations, but remain profoundly lonely because no one speaks to the parts of them that truly matter. In the heart of every man, beneath the calculated resilience and learned detachment, there is a child who once believed he could be loved just for existing. Reaching him is not about praising what he produces or glorifying what he endures. It's about offering a reflection that says, "You are enough, even in your doubts, even in your quiet moments. I see you, and I honor who you are." This is the hidden truth burning inside so many men. It's a truth they rarely articulate, often because they no longer believe anyone would care to understand it. But when they encounter someone who does, someone who sees them beyond their defenses and achievements, the connection that forms is not just emotional, it is transformational. In a world saturated with messages that teach women to captivate men through beauty, charm, and romantic gestures, it is easy to believe that these are the keys to a man's heart. And for a moment, perhaps a night, a month, or even a few years, they might be enough to spark desire, admiration, and attention. Yet if you look deeper into the relationships that endure, the ones that grow stronger instead of fading, you will find that physical attraction and sweet gestures alone are never the foundation. Men, though conditioned to chase after beauty and respond to kindness, carry within them a yearning that these surface-level expressions cannot satisfy. No amount of external sweetness can mend the silent fracture that exists when a man feels unseen at his core. No beauty, no matter how breathtaking, can silence the internal question echoing in his mind. Would you still love me if I were stripped of everything you admire on the outside? Physical beauty may open a door, but it does not build a home. Romantic gestures may create moments, but they do not weave the kind of emotional fabric that withstands the storms of life. A man can be captivated by how you look or how well you treat him, but these things, if unaccompanied by a deeper emotional recognition, quickly become hollow echoes, sweet but ultimately unsatisfying. Carl Jung, in The Undiscovered Self, spoke to this when he reflected, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." True emotional bonds are not forged through admiration alone. They are born when two souls recognize and transform each other. The truth is, when a man falls in love with a woman in the deepest sense, it is not because she fulfills his fantasies or pampers his ego. It is because, in her presence, he feels more himself, not the performer, not the provider, but the man behind all those roles. He feels seen not just for what he can do, but for the mind he carries, the spirit he embodies. the quiet battles he fights within himself that no one else notices. Many women, even with the best intentions, try to win a man's affection by offering more beauty, more sweetness, more romance. They believe that if they are loving enough, giving enough, desirable enough, eventually he will open up, he will stay, he will choose her completely. But without emotional recognition, without the feeling that who he is matters more than what he offers, the connection slowly erodes. Consider the difference between a compliment like, "You're so handsome, I'm lucky to have you," and one like, "I admire the way your mind works. You always find solutions I never would have thought of." The first appeals to his ego, the second touches his identity. The first flatters, the second honors. One fades quickly, the other lingers, planting roots that grow deeper with time. What most women don't realize is that men are starving for this kind of recognition, not because they are fragile, but because all their lives, their inner world has been overlooked, underestimated or dismissed. In relationships where only the surface is nurtured, even the strongest attraction eventually withers. But in relationships where the soul is seen and valued, the bond becomes unbreakable. A woman's beauty can draw a man to her. Her sweetness can endear her to him, but it is her ability to make him feel understood, genuinely, deeply, that binds his heart to hers beyond the temptations of time, stress, or even adversity. To reach a man where it matters most, it is not enough to be admired. You must make him feel that he matters not for how he makes you feel, not for what he can give, but for who he already is, without needing to earn it, without needing to perform. This is the beginning of a love that does not fade but grows, nourished by authenticity, mutual respect, and the quiet yet powerful recognition that both of you are seen, fully, imperfectly, beautifully, and still completely chosen. For most men, admiration is not a luxury. It's a quiet necessity, one that fuels their sense of purpose and grounds their identity. But not all admiration is the same. There's a kind that flatters the ego, surface level, fleeting and performative, and there's another kind, far rarer, that reaches into a man's core and makes him feel seen, trusted, and profoundly respected. That kind doesn't come through exaggerated praise or strategic compliments. It comes through something infinitely more powerful: authenticity. The truth is, men are extremely sensitive to the energy behind the words. Many women say beautiful things, but if those words come from a place of manipulation, insecurity, or emotional neediness, they fall flat, or worse, feel hollow. But when admiration is expressed from a place of calm certainty, grounded presence, and sincere observation, it strikes something within a man that he didn't even know was waiting to be touched. Carl Jung, in his book Psychological Types, explains that the meeting of personalities is governed by their inner truths, not just their outer behavior. This means that what truly draws a man into deeper emotional intimacy is not just how a woman speaks or what she says, but the emotional frequency from which she speaks, the clarity, the firmness, and most importantly, the authenticity behind her words. A woman who says, "I admire your way of thinking," and genuinely means it, without trying to get something in return, without emotional charge or manipulation, is giving a gift far more intimate than touch or beauty. She is validating not what the man performs, but who he is, and that strikes at the root of male emotional hunger. Let's take a simple example. Imagine a man facing a problem. He's under pressure, trying to figure out how to handle something complex. Many women, out of love, might rush in with suggestions or comfort. "Don't worry, it's going to be fine," or "I think you should do this or that." But a woman who simply looks at him and says calmly, "I trust your judgment." She'll always find a way, is doing something radically different. She's not taking over, she's not micromanaging. She's communicating belief, not in what he's done, but in who he is. That kind of sentence doesn't just soothe, it activates his masculine identity. It makes him want to be more of who she sees in him. And here's the paradox. He doesn't feel controlled, he feels free. Because nothing empowers a man more than being trusted by the woman he loves, not for results, but for essence. It's in these subtle, almost invisible moments that emotional bonds are forged. When a man realizes that your admiration isn't dependent on him winning, achieving, or being perfect, he stops performing and starts relaxing. And in that relaxation, he opens. Not out of pressure, not out of guilt, but because he finally feels safe enough to let his guard down. One of the most powerful things a woman can embody is a kind of emotional steadiness, the ability to hold her own ground while still expressing genuine appreciation. Not the kind of admiration that sounds like flattery, "You're the best guy I've ever met," but the kind that is rooted in clarity and truth. "I noticed how you handled that. It was thoughtful. I respect how you take time to think things through before reacting. I feel calm around you, and that means a lot." These aren't lines to memorize, they're lenses to see through. When you begin to look at a man with the eyes of curiosity and respect, your words naturally change. You're no longer trying to win him or impress him, you're witnessing him. And that is where the magic happens. Jung emphasized the value of such presence when he wrote in The Undiscovered Self. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. When a woman has that level of self-awareness, when she knows the value of her words and carries herself with quiet dignity, she creates a space where a man doesn't have to prove anything. He simply has to be. This doesn't mean suppressing your needs or hiding your emotions. On the contrary, it means communicating from a place of ownership and emotional intelligence. Instead of saying, "Why didn't you call me back? You never care." Try, "I really enjoy hearing from you during the day. It helps me feel closer to you." The first is reactive, accusatory, and shaming. The second is vulnerable, direct, and respectful, and it invites connection rather than defensiveness. This is what authentic admiration does. It creates emotional expansion, not contraction. When a man feels admired not because he's been trained to earn it, but because someone sees his value without needing him to constantly prove it, something irreversible shifts. He starts to see himself differently, not through the lens of pressure, but through the mirror of someone who genuinely believes in his essence. He becomes emotionally anchored, not because he's attached, but because he's recognized. That is how deep emotional bonds awaken, not through strategy, not through seduction, but through presence, clarity, and truth. And once a man experiences that kind of connection, the kind where he feels admired not for his performance but for his being, no superficial attraction can compete. In the life of most men, there exists an invisible war, a constant tension between what they must project to the world and what they privately endure. They are expected to be competent, calm, unwavering, emotionally restrained, financially capable, and mentally unshakable. Day after day, they walk through a world that demands from them results, solutions, answers, all while rarely offering the space to simply be. Amid all this pressure, one of the most unspoken desires within a man is to come home, not just to a place, but to a person who does not add to the weight, but gently helps him breathe beneath it. The world teaches men to armor up, to perform, to hide. But the few who are lucky enough to find a woman who doesn't react impulsively, who doesn't demand constant validation, who doesn't create drama as a form of attention, experience something rare, emotional rest. In her presence, they don't feel scrutinized. They feel observed. They don't feel tested. They feel trusted. This is the essence of stoic feminine energy, not coldness or detachment, but emotional maturity that doesn't flinch at discomfort. A woman who listens without immediately rushing to fill the silence, who doesn't collapse into chaos the moment something feels uncertain, who, instead of trying to fix his emotions, simply holds space for him to explore them at his own pace. That kind of energy is not just attractive, it is magnetic. Carl Jung, in Ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self, wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." A man who finds himself constantly fragmented by the external demands of masculinity, expected to be the rock, the provider, the leader, begins to feel whole again only when he meets someone who sees and accepts every side of him. Strength and stillness, certainty and confusion, fire and fatigue. This doesn't mean suppressing your own feelings or becoming passive. Stoic feminine energy isn't about being quiet. It's about being grounded. It means choosing calm over chaos, curiosity over control, presence over pressure. It's the ability to sit in a moment of emotional tension and not flinch, to hear something vulnerable from him and not try to make it about yourself, to allow silence to be sacred rather than uncomfortable. Let's be clear, this kind of energy doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't try to manage his emotions so she can feel safe. She feels safe within herself, and that, in turn, creates a powerful field of trust around her. A man who lives in a world that constantly asks him to perform finds peace in a woman who asks him only to be present. Real-world example: he comes home after a long, draining day carrying silent stress. She doesn't overwhelm him with questions or emotional demands. She simply says, "I made something to eat, no rush, just take your time." No pressure. No performance, just space. And in that space he breathes, and in that breath he softens. Moments like that may seem small, but to a man whose identity is constantly being challenged, they are life-giving. In a relationship filled with emotional noise, he becomes defensive. But in the presence of quiet steadiness, he becomes open. This doesn't mean men want silent partners or emotional distance. Far from it. They want emotional intelligence. They crave a woman who can express her needs clearly, without guilt-tripping, without passive aggression, without weaponizing her feelings. They desire someone whose emotions don't overwhelm them, but rather invite them into a space where both can show up as they are, without masks or performances. Carl Jung again captured the essence of this balance in Psychological Aspects of the Persona when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for many men, that journey only becomes possible when they meet a woman who doesn't ask them to perform, but who gives them space to become. A man doesn't stay close to a woman because she constantly validates him or entertains him. He stays close because in her presence, he remembers who he is beneath all the armor. She's not the escape from his life. She becomes the emotional center that gives meaning to it. When a woman embodies this stoic feminine presence, calm, rooted, observing rather than reacting, she becomes irreplaceable. Not because she gives him peace, but because she awakens the part of him that knows he was made for it. Most men are used to being noticed for what's visible: their body, their achievements, their ability to stay composed under pressure. And, while these things may attract initial attention or social approval, they rarely lead to emotional fulfillment. What most people overlook, often even the men themselves, is how deeply transformative it is to be admired for the invisible, for their thoughts, their values, their perspective, and the emotional presence they bring into a room. When a woman looks at a man and says, "I feel calmer when you're around," or "The way you think about things helps me see life differently," she's not just giving a compliment, she's offering validation that reaches beyond performance. She's recognizing not what he projects, but who he is when no one is watching. And that changes everything. This kind of admiration hits a place that most men didn't even realize was starving. The world often teaches them that their worth is measured in control, action, and output. So when someone sees beauty in how they reflect, how they observe, how they care quietly or lead without force, it touches a part of them long buried under years of pressure. Carl Jung, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, captured this when he wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That process of being fully seen and still accepted is terrifying because it strips away the persona that men work so hard to perfect. But when a woman speaks directly to his inner world, to his intelligence, his intuition, his emotional impact, she is giving him permission to drop the performance and take pride in who he really is. Compare these two statements. "You look so good in that shirt. Your arms are amazing." "You make me feel safer when I talk to you. I love the way you listen." Both are compliments, but only one creates emotional memory. Only one makes a man walk away with his chest just a little more open, not because he was admired for being impressive, but because he was recognized for being meaningful. This is the power of admiring a man's mind and soul. It makes him feel essential rather than replaceable. It makes him reflect on who he is, not just what he does. It connects you, not to his ego, but to his identity. A man may forget 100 compliments about his appearance, but he will never forget the moment someone saw brilliance in how he thinks, or strength in how he carries the emotions of others, or clarity in how he makes decisions when everyone else is confused. That kind of recognition creates emotional pride, not just satisfaction. And pride, when it is rooted in being valued rather than being used, becomes one of the most powerful bonds in a man's life. So if you want to create a connection that lasts, look beyond what everyone else sees. Speak to the man he is when he's not performing. Admire not what's loud and visible, but what is quiet and constant within him. When you do, you won't just have his affection, you'll have his devotion, because few things are more unforgettable than being loved exactly where you once felt invisible. Even the most loving, well-intentioned women can unknowingly say or do things that erode the emotional connection with a man, not because they don't care, but because they're unaware of how men process emotional cues differently. What seems like a simple request, a bit of feedback or a motivational comment, can land like a blow to his identity when it's not delivered with awareness and respect. Let's start with the common habit of correction. Repeatedly pointing out what a man is doing wrong, even subtly, whether it's how he drives, how he loads the dishwasher, or how he responds in conversation, sends a message over time. I don't trust your judgment. And for a man, this doesn't just feel like criticism. It feels like a crack in the foundation of being seen as capable, which is core to how he experiences love. Then there are the comparisons. Statements like, other men make more time for their partners, or you used to be so romantic, are not only unproductive, they are emotionally dangerous. These words create shame, not motivation. They put a man in a position where he feels measured and found lacking, which often leads not to connection, but to withdrawal, defensiveness, or emotional shutting down. Carl Jung wrote in The Relations, between the ego and the unconscious, what you resist not only persists but will grow in size. When a woman resists expressing her needs directly and instead chooses sarcasm, passive aggression, or guilt, she doesn't create change. She creates resistance. The man may comply temporarily, but emotional intimacy suffers. And worse, resentment begins to grow on both sides. It's not that women shouldn't express dissatisfaction or needs. Quite the opposite. The issue lies in how it's done. Men respond not to emotional pressure, but to emotional clarity. Instead of saying, a real man would know what I need, say, it means a lot to me when you check in. It helps me feel close to you. See the difference? One shames, the other invites. Another common mistake is emotional escalation, when a woman raises her tone, becomes reactive, or demands connection through emotional volatility. For men who are already operating in high-stress environments, this doesn't open them up. It triggers them to close, not because they don't care, but because it signals chaos, not safety. If you want to restore the connection, start with curiosity instead of conclusion. Replace, why do you always do that, with, can you help me understand what you were thinking in that moment? This approach respects his mind and invites conversation rather than conflict. It says, I value how you think, even if I don't yet understand it. And finally, shift the emotional language from what's missing to what you value. Instead of saying, you never make me feel appreciated, say, when you do that thing where you touch my back in passing, it makes me feel so seen. I love that. You are reinforcing what you want, rather than attacking what's absent. Carl Jung emphasized the power of intentional awareness when he wrote in Man and His Symbols, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If you are unaware of how your communication lands emotionally, you may unintentionally sabotage the very intimacy you are trying to build. Every relationship will face tension. The difference between those that deepen and those that collapse lies in the willingness to speak not just truthfully, but respectfully, in a way that honors your partner's emotional experience without silencing your own. When a man feels that your words come from a place of respect, belief, and invitation, not shame, pressure, or emotional noise, He listens. He responds. He shows up. Not because he was forced, but because the connection feels worth preserving. There is one phrase, a simple combination of words, that carries more weight than any romantic gesture, any compliment on strength, looks, or success. It's a phrase no man will ever ask to hear, and yet deep in the private corners of his heart, it's the very thing he yearns for the most. And when a woman says it, with clarity, sincerity, and no agenda, something shifts inside him that no other act of affection could ever replicate. I trust your way of thinking. I admire the man you are. This is not a line designed to flatter. It is not manipulation. It's not praise for what he's done, or how much he's provided, or how impressive he appears. It is something infinitely more sacred. It's a mirror that reflects his internal identity and tells him in no uncertain terms that who he is, as he is enough. For most men, that level of recognition is disarming. Not because they haven't heard compliments before, but because they've almost never been seen. So much of their lives are lived in performance, showing strength, solving problems, being reliable. But behind every success is a silent question. Would I still be valued if I stopped proving myself? When a woman speaks this phrase, not in a moment of reward, but as a calm expression of truth, something deep awakens in him. It's not about dependence. It's not about ego. It's about dignity. About being seen as a human being with depth, vision, and soul. Carl Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But for many men, becoming who they truly are feels like a risk, unless they're with someone who reflects that identity back to them with warmth and belief. This phrase, then, is not about changing him. It's about revealing him to himself. Picture this. He's trying to figure out a life decision. He's not sure. He doesn't talk about his doubts, but they're there under the surface. Most people offer solutions. A few offer sympathy. But you look at him and say, "Whatever you decide, I trust your judgment." You think with depth. And that's something I admire in you. You haven't told him what to do. You haven't pushed him to act. What you've done is given him space to step into his own strength. You've reminded him of who he is, not through pressure, but through presence. In that moment, something irreversible happens, not because you've made him fall in love, but because you've helped him feel proud of the man he is when he's with you. And that is the foundation of emotional attachment that goes beyond desire or even affection. It becomes devotion. The truth is, men don't stay with women because they are perfect. They stay because in their presence they feel more themselves, and nothing creates that feeling more powerfully than words spoken with authenticity, admiration, and trust. So say it. Say it not to keep him, not to manipulate, but to offer what so few men have ever truly received. I trust your way of thinking. I admire the man you are. You may never fully know how much that one sentence heals, uplifts, and awakens. But he will, and he will remember. Not because you told him he was great, but because you saw him, and in doing so, gave him the courage to finally see himself.